Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ariel, for hosting us today. Yizku mitzvot. And Hashem, your home shall always be open for smachot, shiurim, Torah, mitzvot, wonderful things. Thank you very much. Okay. Today, B'ezras Hashem, we're going to learn Pirkei Aleph, Mishnah Zayin of Pirkei Avot, continuing in our series on Pirkei Avot, very important. And we have the following important lesson. Nitai ha'arbeli omer. Nitai the Arbeli says, harxek mishachen ra. So harxek mishachen ra means the simple explanation is distance yourself from a shachen ra, which means an evil neighbor. The al titchaber lrasha. Do not attach yourself. Do not become close to a wicked person. The al tityesh min hapur'anut. And do not despair of retribution. We have to understand what that means. What does that mean? Do not despair of retribution. So we have a few important lessons over here from Nitai Ha'arbeli. Number one, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Number two, don't become a friend with a rasha, with a wicked person. And number three, do not despair of retribution. So we have to understand what exactly are we talking about. So it's interesting to study this Mishnah actually on this week's parasha, because in this week's parasha we have the famous concept, Parashat Korach, called Oy LaRasha ve'Oy LeShcheno. Woe unto the wicked man and woe unto his neighbor. We're going to talk about where we see it in the parasha, but let's just give you the source. This comes up in a very interesting case. The case is that, as you know, there's a concept called leprosy. Leprosy, or tsarat, means that a person was doing something wrong, and then Hashem sends him, it could be in one of a few places, either on his skin or his clothing or even on his house, a blotch of some white kind of substance, and there's a hair that grows out of it. It's kind of gross, and that is a sign that this person has what's called tsarat. He has leprosy. Now, in the case of a house, it's an interesting thing that could take place. Very interesting. What could happen is that you put that, if let's say, for example, let's take a step back. What happens if the house has this brick and the brick has the leprosy on it? So then that brick has to come out. They have to get rid of it somewhere far away, and they have to take out everything from the house, and they have to take out that wall, and they have to redo it. It's a situation where the guy really has to go through some kind of change inside of himself in order to become better. It could come up for a number of reasons. It could be that he's very stingy. It could be that he's very he speaks lashon hara, he talks gossip. A bunch of things could be the reason for this guy to have this problem. What happens if he has an attached house? Okay, so now it becomes a little different. So now, not only is he affected, but that brick serves as a wall in between his house and his neighbor's house. So, but the rule is still the same rule. You got to get rid of that brick, and you have to get rid of the whole wall. Right? You have to carve out a big chunk of the house. So over there, Mishnah tells us, Oy LaRasha, woe unto the Rasha that this happens to him, and woe unto his neighbor. His neighbor is suffering. He didn't do anything, but he has to suffer the fact that the guy who lives in the next door to him did this kind of thing. So the Mishnah is telling us, harxek mishachen ra. And it comes up in this week's parasha because it's a very interesting thing. There's a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader of Klal Yisrael, undisputed. Nobody questions that. And Aaron is the Kohen Gadol, and everything is good. Everything is the way it should be. And comes along this guy, Korach, and because of his jealousy and because of his claim against Moshe that how could he be the leader or how could Aaron be the Kohen Gadol? It should have been him. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he has this claim. But it's not him alone. There's himself, and then there are these other people. There's Datan and Aviram, and then there's a guy named On ben Pelet, and they come from the tribe of Reuven. So the Mefarshim point out, how did he get them to join his rebellion? What was it that got them to be together with Korach in the rebellion? And the answer is, says Rashi in the parasha, that the way they were encamped in the desert was that the tribe of Levi was in the center, and directly south of them was the tribe of Reuven. Because they were in such close proximity, they were neighbors with each other, they were together all the time, so his effect, his influence had a bad effect on them. And he managed to suck them into his rebellion. Oy la'rasha, oy l'shcheno. Woe unto the Rasha, woe unto the neighbor of the Rasha. So here's a person that he's not doing anything other than just living next to the wicked person. It has an effect on him. It has a bad effect on him. And it comes up in other places as well. Very interesting Gemara in Masechet Sukkah. The Gemara tells us that in the Bet Mikdash, there were 24 groups of Kohanim that served in the temple. And each one of them got to serve 2 weeks out of the year, and some got a little bit more. So each group had a name for that group of Kohanim that would come. Now, one group of Kohanim had the name called Bilga. Very interesting name, Bilga. Where did this name come from? So it says that there was a woman, her name was Miriam, the daughter of Bilga. And this woman had been the daughter of one of the Kohanim that was the head of this group of Kohanim that served every 2 weeks out of the year. And what had happened was she had left her faith and she had gotten together with some Greek. And when the Greeks had come into the temple and they started to basically do all kinds of things to the holy vessels and things that were there, so she actually approached the Mizbeach, this woman, Miriam Bat Bilga. The Mizbeach is the altar where they sacrifice things. And she started to kick it. And she started to say something like, you altar, until when will you keep swallowing up the money of the Jewish people? What she meant to say is, by them having to bring so many sacrifices all the time, so it depletes their funds. They have to bring this animal on this holiday. They have to bring that animal on that holiday. They have to do this if they messed up like that, and they have to do this if they messed up like that. It costs a lot of money, and all the funds are depleted, right? So she kicked the Mizbeach, which is a very big act of disrespect. Once the Hashmonaim in the story of Hanukkah got rid of all the Greeks, so they had heard about what this woman had did to the Mizbeach. And they penalized her father's group of Kohanim that would serve in the temple by doing the following. In the Bet HaMikdash, you would see, if you would take a look at the courtyard, there were rings that were stuck in the ground, kind of shaped like a rainbow, but they were stuck in the ground. And the idea of it was that when they would slaughter the animals, they would put the animal head under the ring, and that way it couldn't move, and they would slaughter it that way. For that group, the head of that group, his daughter was Miriam Bat Bilga, what they did was they knocked out that ring and they made it wobbly so that it wouldn't do its job as they were slaughtering the animal. Welcome. Right? So the idea is, so the Gemara asks, why did you penalize the father? He didn't do that. It was the daughter that did that. So the Gemara says, because Because whenever you hear a child saying certain things, so then you know that it came from the parents. So if she did certain things like that, it means that her dad was the one who had that feeling. He had that negative feeling towards the sacrifices that were in the temple. So we're penalizing him. So the Gemara then asks, well, in that case, I mean, it's just the father that did something wrong, but you're penalizing the entire group. You're telling all the Kohanim that their ring in the Bet HaMikdash now, that was one of the 24 rings there for their group, it's coming out because the dad did something wrong? Well, it's not fair. Says the Gemara, oy la'rasha, oy lishcheno. Woe unto the wicked man, woe unto his neighbor. It's like he's getting hit, and it means everybody got hit. Just to give it as an example, the Mefarshim say an idea of, let's say somebody walks into a tannery. A tannery is a place that they make leather and hides, and stinky smells are all over the place, and it smells terrible. Welcome. It smells awful in the tannery. Now, even if you're not purchasing a single thing, welcome everybody, welcome, right? Even if you're not purchasing anything, the bottom line is that just by walking into the tannery, when you come out, you're going to smell. It smells so bad, it smells so foul that you smell when you leave. So just by being in close proximity, says the Gemara, they were next to this Kohen that had these bad feelings towards the Mizbeach, and because of that, his daughter went and kicked the Mizbeach and did all these things and said not nice things to the Mizbeach. So just by being there, it has an effect on the person, automatically. So over here says the Mishnah, harxek mishachen ra. Harxek mishachen ra. It's very important to stay away from somebody that would be considered a bad neighbor. I have to read you the words of the Rambam to understand this a little bit better. This is the Rambam in Hilchot Deot, Perek Vav, Halacha Aleph. Derech briato shel Adam, להיות נמשך בדעותיו ובמעשיו אחר רעיו וחבריו, נוהג כמנהג אנשי מדינתו. The way of a man is to be influenced in his ways and his deeds after his friends and after the people in his country. לפיכך צריך אדם להתחבר לצדיקים. That's why, says the Rambam, a person has to make every effort to be close to the tzaddikim, to the righteous men. ולשב אצל החכמים, to live, to dwell with the wise men, with the Torah scholars. תמיד, always. כדי שילמד ממעשיהם, so that he learns from their ways. ויתרחק מן הרשעים ההולכים בחושך. He should stay away from wicked people that go in darkness. כדי שלא ילמד ממעשיהם, so that he shouldn't learn from their ways. הוא ששלמה אומר, this is what Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, says, הולך את חכמים יחכם. Somebody who goes together with the wise men will become wiser. But somebody who is together with ksilim, which means people who do silly things, so he'll go down the drain. He's in a place where the culture of the place is very evil. And he's in a place where people are not going in a straightforward path. He has to go somewhere where the people are good and they go in the right way. Says the Rambam about his own time. And what if everywhere they're doing bad things, no matter, and the Rambam saying about his own time, which is in the 1200s. Imagine what he would say about today. If everywhere they're doing the wrong things, or for another reason, let's say he can't go to a different country because they're going to draft him, or because he's ill, he can't go. So then, yeshev levado yechidi. He should sit alone. Right? So, in other words, a person sometimes might even need to become antisocial if the people around him just aren't behaving properly. And to connect with the people around him means to connect with wicked people, and he's going to be very heavily influenced by them. he sometimes needs to be antisocial. It's a scary thought, but that's what it is. And if, let's say, they simply don't allow him to sit down and to stay at peace, they're forcing him to do what they want him to do, and it's everywhere. He can't escape it. So then he says, he should go out to the caves, he says. To the thorns, to the deserts. And he should not go in the ways of sinners. It's a very powerful statement from the Rambam. The Rambam is saying that if they're forcing the person to do what they want him to do, and they're not letting him stay alone and be a tzaddik, they're forcing their evil ways, he's got to escape somehow. He's got to do something to get away from it. This is what this Mishnah is telling us, guys. Harchek mishachen ra. Stay away from an evil neighbor. This is a problem because it has an effect on us no matter what. To be in close proximity to these types of things definitely will have an effect on us. Now, very interesting point that the Maharal points out. He says, from a neighbor, the only thing that you can do is distance yourself. The neighbor has an effect on you no matter what. He's there, he's close to you, you see him every day. It's just there. All you can do is, you can't tell him to move, but you can pick up yourself and move. When it comes to a rasha, to a wicked person that does not live next to you, all you have to do is just not connect with him. You don't have to move. You just have to just not become close to him. Says the Ben Ish Chai, a beautiful idea. He says, if you, proper grammar would have it, again, what are the words of the Mishnah? Harchek mishachen ra. Harchek mishachen ra. So I translated it as, how did I translate it? I told you, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Okay? Distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Now, if it was about distancing yourself, the Ben Ish Chai points out, it should have said hitrachek. Hitrachek means you yourself stay away. Harchek mishachen ra sounds a little bit different. Says the Ben Ish Chai, I'll give you a chidush. It depends where you put the comma. Very interesting idea, he says. Harchek mishachen means distance from the neighbor, ra, bad things, right? He says, you have a neighbor, he's got issues, get the evil that he's doing away from him. Help him to come closer to Torah, to mitzvot. Bring him in, show him love, show him whatever it may be. Harchek mishachen ra. Get rid of the ra from the shachen. Yeah.
I was just thinking along those lines.
Okay.
I've heard it before, but when you said the Mishnah, where the Rambam said, "You move out to the caves if the people are so bad,"
right?
And I started thinking, wait, did he ever move away like that to the caves? And he didn't. So
right.
He's more like the Ben Ish Chai, like, yeah, he was more like.
Right. He actually moved a lot of places. Believe it or not. He started off in Spain, and he moved to if there was anybody who ever loved the Jewish people, nobody ever loved the Jewish people more than the Rambam. The Rambam, his whole life was dedicated to teaching Torah to the whole Jewish nation and making it accessible to them. This book, he writes, that the Rambam wrote, I'm writing this book in order to make it easier for everyone to study the Torah. That's what he said. And he wrote every single halakha, that anything in the whole entire Torah. Like, for example, the Shulchan Aruch Code of Jewish Law doesn't talk about things that aren't relevant to us. Like, for example, how to do the sacrifices in the temple. He doesn't talk about that because, unfortunately, that's not relevant to us today. The Rambam does. The Rambam talks about every single halakha in the whole entire Torah, so that nothing should be inaccessible to somebody who, let's say, can't learn a Gemara. But you speak Hebrew, you can open up a Rambam and read it. But not only that, the Rambam, his language is so deep that you need to understand there are many, many books written on the Rambam. Why did he say this word? Why did he say that word? It's very, very deep. But the point that the Ben Ish Chai is making over here is that there's a concept to distance evil from your neighbor. It's a different way of looking at it. And that, by the way, It's brought down very interestingly. How do you do that? So there are two approaches. One approach is to go to the neighbor and to say, hey, you're doing A, B, C, D, it's a problem. So usually that approach doesn't work. Usually, if you're trying to affect a change on somebody, when you show by example, that's very, very good. It's very beneficial. It helps a lot because they see how things are supposed to be done and it gives them a good feeling, etc. And that causes them to want to change. Another very powerful lesson about this concept actually comes from the Sfat Emet. The Sfat Emet, one of the great Gera Rebbes, says an amazing idea. The Sfat Emet learns that there's a mitzvah in the Torah called Hashavat Aveda, which means to return a lost object. And it says that if you see your friend's donkey lost along the way, and you see that you know whose it is, you can't ignore it. You have to return your friend's donkey to him, and you can't just leave it. You have to do the right thing with it and bring it back. Says the Sfat Emet, in that line of the Torah, there's a very deep message. And he says, when you see your friend's donkey lost along the way, means you see that you have a friend, you have a Jewish soul, that this guy unfortunately is messing up. He's doing things wrong. So to say, his donkey is lost. He's not doing things the way that he should be doing. So how do you affect the change in that person? Says the Sfat Emet, the way to do it is to change yourself. Hashev Teshivenu means that you need to do teshuvah on yourself. And you ask yourself, well, what does one have to do with the other? That guy is messing up. Let's say, I don't know, he's eating not kosher. Okay. So how does me working on my anger or me working on my, arrogance affect the change in that guy? So Sfat Emet explains beautifully. He says, we're all intertwined. The Jewish people are all one big neshama. We're collectively one item. And if you would imagine us all being like one big body, and just like there's something in the pinky, or there's something in the eyeball, or it affects every part of the rest of the body. Let's say somebody's pinky hurts. The guy might not be walking normally, he might not be functioning normally because of his pinky. It's in pain, it's suffering, right? So we're all one part of this one big body. So if you affect a change in yourself and you heal the part by you that is aching, so then that helps the other person to now be able to work on himself, because now he's not hurting from your end anymore. He's got more time to focus on himself to be able to do better. It's a very interesting concept that he says. So therefore, says the Sfat Emet, you want to help other people to come back to Torah mitzvot and to not mess up as much, do tshuva on yourself. It's an amazing thing that he says. So that's another very important way to be harxek mishachén, to distance from the neighbor ra. You want to know how to distance from the neighbor ra, evil? You distance from the neighbor evil by you improving yourself, which is a very important thing to think about as well. Far too often we point fingers. You say, oh, look at him, he did this, he did that, he did it, etc. And we play the blame game, but really it's important that we should look at ourselves. There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov, that one time he saw somebody desecrating the Shabbat. And the Baal Shem Tov always felt that if Hashem is showing me something, that means that I am guilty of the same thing. If Hashem showed me somebody, let's say, getting angry, that means I have anger. Hashem showed me somebody desecrating Shabbat, it means I desecrated Shabbat. So the Baal Shem Tov asked, well, how did I desecrate Shabbat? How did I do that? So he said that there's a concept found in the Zohar Kadosh that somebody who is a Talmid Chacham, he's a Torah scholar, he's on the level of Shabbat all week long. Somebody who really is a Torah scholar, he's on that level of Shabbat all week long. So he said that he had asked a particular Talmid Chacham to go do something for him. And then he realized it was improper of him to do that, because he's a big tzaddik and I shouldn't have used him for my own personal needs. So he said, that was my desecrating Shabbat, because I desecrated this Talmid Chacham. I used him for something that was beneath his honor, that I should do that to him. So, okay, but the point is that we look at something, and instead of blaming that guy for why he desecrated Shabbat, I look at myself and I say, oh, I have something that I need to fix. So a way to get rid of the evil from my neighbor is by me actually fixing myself, which is a beautiful chidush from the Ben Ish Chai. Okay, so the next part of the Mishnah tells us that al titchaber la'rasha. Do not attach yourself. Do not befriend a wicked person. So this is an extremely important point. This comes up in the Tanakh many times. Many times. I'll tell you a couple of very important stories from the Tanakh. There was a king by the name of Achav, and there was a king by the name of Yehoshaphat. After Shlomo HaMelech, Shlomo's son, Rechavam, was the king. Rechavam had his nation split into two. And the king became Yerovam, was the king of Israel, and Rehovam was the king of Yehuda. It became two nations, Yehuda and Israel. After that, they continued having two kings. The king of Israel eventually became King Achav. He was a very wicked king. He had a lot of idol worship, and he wasn't considered to be the greatest. Yehoshaphat, however, was the son of King Asa, and King Asa was a huge tzaddik, and Yehoshaphat also was a huge tzaddik. At a certain point, King Achav wanted to go and capture a place called Ramot Gilad from the king of Aram. Now it happened to be that when Moshe had conquered the land, so Ramot Gilad belonged to the Jewish people. So Achav said, this land belongs to us. Let's go conquer it back from the king of Aram. So he goes to Yehoshaphat and he asks Yehoshaphat, are you coming with me? And then this whole story happened, how Achav brought all of his prophets, and all the prophets said that Hashem wants you to go to war, and you're going to win, and everything's going to be amazing. And Yehoshaphat saw these guys, this is not the real thing. He needs a real prophet, a real tzaddik, to come and to tell him about what's going on. So he said to Achav, isn't there anybody that's a real Navi of Hashem? So he said to him, well, there's this one guy, his name is Micha, and he always says bad things about me, and I don't want to hear from him. He says, bring him. You want me to come? I want him. And this Micha ended up giving a prophecy that it's a disaster, it's not going to work, and that Hashem specifically is trying to trick everybody through these other false prophets. It's a very interesting thing, by the way, about false prophecy. False prophecy doesn't mean a person is lying through his teeth, like just a malignant, malicious type of person. False prophecy comes from a person who's not as fine-tuned as he should be, which means that there were yeshivas for how to be a prophet. For example, I know I'm going off topic, but Shmuel, for example, was given over to Eli. Shmuel the Navi, the prophet, was given over to Eli for Eli to teach him how to be a prophet. The Derech Hashem, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, talks about this at length, and he explains that a prophet who is not properly following his training, meaning there are some messages that he's supposed to accept and some that he's supposed to reject. There are certain things that he's supposed to take and certain things not. And he's supposed to be on a level that's high enough to sift through the messages. There's a whole big to-do about how to be a proper prophet. So failure to do your job properly results in a false prophecy. That's really what comes up. They're not coming to maliciously lie. They're not coming to try and, they're just not doing their job right. It's an interesting concept that the Ramchal speaks out. So, you have a question?
I always thought that Hashem chooses somebody to be a Navi and he gives him the prophecy and becomes a Navi. I didn't know that they learned it. They
learned it, sure. They had to learn how to be a Navi. You have to know exactly what happens when the prophecy is coming. It was something similar to almost like a seizure, like an epilepsy type of a thing, event that's going on. You have to know how to understand what's coming to you. See, what would happen is that they would get up and say at 12 p.m. there's going to be a thunderstorm, right? And it would happen at 11:58. They were off by 2 minutes, right? So you say, well, he's a prophet. He's off by, no, that's Navi Sheker. And he gets a death penalty. You're off by 2 minutes, death penalty. Why? Because you are not doing your job the right way. It's not necessarily so that this guy is coming with malicious intent. Could be he's doing that too. It's also possible, but I'm saying many times it was simply failure to do their job properly. Anyway, this Navi Micha comes along and he tells them that this whole thing is a lie. These prophets were being tested by Hashem and they failed. And that's why they told you what they told you. And there's nothing doing. You're going to die. It's a disaster. At any rate, they both decide to go to war. Both Achav and Yoshaphat together go to war against Ramot Gilad. But it was unclear to Aram that Yoshaphat is also at war with them. And they were told to attack the king of Israel, namely Achav. And they did. Yoshaphat came in different clothing than he would normally come. And he would manage to flee. They saw that they were losing, but they still shot and killed with their arrows King Achav, and he died. He totally died. So when he got back from the war, so there was a prophet by the name of Yehu, and Yehu told him, "Titchaber lרשע, paratz Hashem et maasecha." When you connected to the wicked man, Achav, so Hashem destroyed your deeds. In other words, there's a big problem here that you, Yoshaphat, connected with King Achav. He was a wicked man. That should not have happened. That should never have taken place. And it happened again with the next king of Israel, a man by the name of Achaziah, that decided that he wants to build a fleet of ships. And he approached King Yoshaphat to do it together, and they both built these ships, and all the ships got destroyed. Same idea. That what are you doing going ahead and connecting with this wicked man, Achaziah? So there's a concept not to become attached, not to befriend a wicked person. A wicked person can give you the worst of worst advice. I'm sure you know the story with Tamar and Amnon. You guys know the story, right? Tamar and Amnon. Tamar was the daughter of King David. Amnon was the son of King David. Now Amnon was a son of King David from an Eshet Ifat Toar. He had conquered a certain place, and he desired one of the ladies that were local over there, was with her and had a child. That child was Amnon. Now Amnon desired very much his sister Tamar. They weren't from the same mother, but they were from the same father. And what had happened was that he was almost bedridden. He was so sick because he had such a love and a lust for his sister Tamar. He didn't know what to do. So there was a man by the name of Yonadav ben Shema'ah. Yonadav ben Shema'ah saw that his friend Amnon was actually his cousin. He saw that his cousin was in a bad state. So he said, listen, here's what you do. Summon her. Have the king bring her over to you, meaning your father, and tell him that you need some help, that she should bake something for you, that she should do something for you, and serve it to you, and that way you'll feel better. And when she's there, seize the opportunity and do what you got to do. Shem Yishmor. That's what he told him to do, and that's exactly what he did. So Amnon had her come over. The king sent her over. She was baking certain things, and she was doing it for him. And then she wanted to serve it to him, and he said, come over here, and she went over. And that's when he grabbed her, and he basically, Hashem Yishmor, raped her. Hashem Yishmor. Disaster. Because of this, her brother, Avshalom, was very, very upset, and he killed his brother, Amnon. He killed him. So Amnon, with this wicked advice from his cousin, ended up doing this terrible sin and ended up losing his life. It's al titchaber lרשע. Don't become friends with a wicked person. Their advice is a disaster. Their friendship is a disaster. It's all bad. There's nothing good that comes out from it. You have to attach yourself, like the Rambam said, to good, holy, wonderful people that only do good. Extremely important. So, this comes up in a lot of practical ways. A person at shul could choose to sit next to somebody who yaps away, right? It could be during davening, it could be during the speech, it could be during they talk. That's one place you could find a seat, or you could sit by the corner or wherever it is that they don't talk. One time, my father and I were in a certain shul in whatever, it doesn't matter where it was, and we sat down, and we were guests there. We had no idea that we sat down in the section of the shul that they just don't stop talking. I mean, they were yapping away the whole time. And my father and I were looking at each other like, what is going on over here? So we picked up and we moved to the totally opposite side of this shul. It's a huge, huge shul. And the rabbi noticed that we had picked up and moved. So the rabbi looks at both of us, he says, good move. Like it's a known thing. That corner over there, you stay away from that. It's important. That's called al titchaber la'rasha. Somebody that disrespects the shul, disrespects the sanctity of the place. You don't want to be together with that person or in that vicinity. You want to pick up and leave. Or somebody that they only speak lashon hara. They invite them over to your house. All they do is yap away about other people. Al titchaber la'rasha. Don't invite that person because you're going to fail in lashon hara. It's important to be aware of that. So people sometimes, they are pressured into dressing a certain way because their friends dress like that, etc. And all of a sudden you see them dressing totally not sanua. Why? What happened? Oh, they're hanging out with this group. They're hanging out with this crowd, and that's not good. It's important for us to be aware that that these things have an effect. Our neighborhood, everything has an effect on us. So it's important to be aware because before you know it, you find yourself doing stuff that God forbid you never would ever think that you would do. So it's important to be aware. Okay, now, the last part of this Mishnah says the following. Ve'al tityaesh min hapur'anut. We said that this means do not despair of retribution. What does that mean? Do not despair of retribution. Al tityaesh min hapur'anut. So there are two main explanations that I saw to this Mishnah. And they're as follows. Al tityaesh min hapur'anut. Welcome. Al tityaesh min hapur'anut means the following. Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura says it means that you have somebody that is unfortunately a wicked man, but the guy is doing so well. He is making a killing. He's making tons of money, and he's just on top of the world. And you say to yourself, okay, if I connect with this guy, I'll probably also, jump on the bandwagon. I'll hop on the train, and I'm gonna also, do like that. I'll have tremendous success, and I'll have everything I need together with this guy. It's true, he's a very wicked man, but if you can't beat him, join him, and that's it. Says Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura, Al tityaesh min hapur'anut means do not despair. Don't go anywhere near that guy, because retribution will come to this fellow. It might seem as though his wicked ways are benefiting him, but you should rest assured that it's not going to help. Certain deeds, certain acts that people do are considered wicked in the eyes of Hashem, and they'll get punished for it. No questions asked. So stay away from the guy, because even though it looks like he's on top of the world right now, and he's doing what he's doing and everything's good, stay far away. He's going to get it. And that's something that you can rest assured will take place. So I'll tell you a story about the Chafetz Chaim, just an example of this concept. There was a woman who was a widow. Unfortunately, she lost her husband, and she had many children. And she signed a lease on an apartment, and she couldn't afford an apartment. She couldn't afford anything, but she had no choice. She has to live somewhere. So this was in the town of none other than the Chafetz Chaim, the great Chafetz Chaim. And she signs on the lease. They're there. He comes to collect rent after the first month. She doesn't have the money. No money. So the guy realizes where this is headed. He says, tenants that can't even pay after the first month, that means that they're not going to pay after the second month or the third month or the fourth. I'm going to be stuck here for the whole time of the lease or even beyond with this. and I won't get my money. I'm going to lose money on the rental. So he said to her, listen, you have 1 week and you have to leave. Find a new place, find a solution. And she said, I'm sorry, I have nowhere to go. And he said, very sorry, but you got to figure something out. A week went by. Like she said, she had nowhere to go. She was staying there. And he said, no problem. You want to stay? Stay. He goes and he takes the roof literally off of her apartment. In other words, he literally takes the shingles off of the roof. Said, you want to stay here? Go for it. You don't have a roof over your head. And, it was raining. It was freezing. It was snowing. Who knows what was going on over there? And she and her children had nowhere to go. So she had to go somewhere because she can't stay like that. People went, begged, and pleaded with him that he should not do this to her. She's a widow, have some mercy, something. And no, he wouldn't have it. He would not hear of it. And she had no choice but to pick up with all her children and to go live in a cave. She had to find a cave that was a natural place where she could go underneath and have a natural roof over her head. So the Chafetz Chaim heard about what took place. And then it says that he got up and he said the pasuk that the Torah says. Chol almana v'yatom lo te'anun. The Torah says, any widow and any orphan you shall not oppress. Im aneh te'aneh oto, you shall afflict him. Ki imtza'o kitz'ak elai, if they call out to me, shamoa eshma tza'akato, I will hear his cry. V'chara api ve'aragti etchem, and I will get mad and I will kill you. The Chafetz Chaim read that pasuk out loud. Then the Chafetz Chaim said, I wonder what kind of death will befall this person. That's it. Now it took some time. It says that the guy was walking around for 10 years. Hello, welcome. The guy was walking around for 10 years and everything was fine. But then one day, the story goes that a rabid dog came, bit him, and the guy was suffering crazy pain. He was suffering. He was going through excruciating pain. He started barking like a dog, actually. For a few weeks, they couldn't help him at all. He was hospitalized, and he died. So he died a very terrible, painful death. But says the Chafetz Chaim, I wonder how he's going to die. In other words, when you do something like this to a poor woman, it's coming to him. So a person might think, look, here's this guy. He did something very wicked. Bottom line, he got somebody else to come in and he got his rent. And it happened for 10 years. He was doing well for 10 years. No issues. You say to yourself, very good. So I should connect with that because I do that. I'll be the same. Says the Mishnah, Al tityeash min hapor. Do not despair of retribution. Retribution will come. Another story that's brought down, pretty amazing. There was somebody in the time of the Tsar that they used to unfortunately kidnap children in Russia in order to enlist them in the army. And this butcher, his son was kidnapped to be enlisted in the army. So what he did was, he figured if I get a replacement for them, I can get my son back. That's what he did. He went himself and kidnapped some other Jewish kid and brought him to the army to get his son back. And he got his son back. But it's a terrible thing. You kidnapped another child. You can't do that. And what ended up happening with his own son, Hashem Yishmor, was that his son had blood poisoning and he couldn't end up, even in the hospital, people, they were so afraid of getting contaminated by him that they didn't even want to treat him. Eventually they died. The kid died and the Chevra Kaddish didn't even want to bury him because they were afraid of getting, he was contagious for whatever disease he had. Again, a person does something wicked. You think, oh, he did something wicked. He got away with it. No. Al tityeash min hapur'anut. There is always going to be retribution for what happens. So that's the first pshat in what al tityeash min hapur'anut means, which means that don't be afraid, don't worry. The guy's going to get it. there will be retribution. That's the first explanation. Comes along the Rambam with a second explanation. The Rambam says, you know what it means? Al tityesh min hapur'anut. Al tityesh means don't give up hope. Don't give up hope min hapur'anut, meaning that even if, God forbid, there's pur'anut, there's a disaster happening, don't give up hope. You're going to be okay. There's a concept that we find in the Gemara, which says the following. There's a story about Chizkiyahu the king, and he was a very righteous man, and he didn't have children. He wasn't willing to have a child because he saw through Ruach HaKodesh that his son was going to become a man by the name of Menashe. Menashe was one of the worst kings who ever lived. It says he killed thousands of people. He brought idol worship to the temple. He was a disaster of a person. Just awful. Big murderer, big idolater, just awful. So Chizkiyahu said, I'm not having kids. Now, Chizkiyahu was on the level to be Mashiach. But because he wouldn't have children, Hashem said, you're not going to be the Mashiach. Hashem sent Yeshayahu, the prophet, to him and told him, you're going to die. Because you are refusing to do the mitzvah of having children. You have a mitzvah to do. You're supposed to get married, you're supposed to have children. And you're not willing to do that, so you're violating the mitzvah of the Torah. So you can't be the Mashiach and you're going to die. So Yeshayahu said, but I'm gonna have a child named Menashe. He's a wicked man. Yeshayahu said to him, why are you worried about the calculations of Hashem? Did Hashem ask you what you think about it? You have a mitzvah. You have to get married and have children. That's it. You don't make calculations beyond that. Whatever happens after that is not your concern. So Chizkiyahu said, okay, so I have to get married then. He said, but your time is up. Hashem already decided. So Chizkiyahu turned to the wall and started to pray. Yeshayahu said, but didn't you hear what I told you? It's over. So Chizkiyahu said, Kach mekublani min bet Abba. He says, this is what I learned from my father's father. He says, talking about Yehoshaphat, who we spoke about earlier. He says, Afilu cherev chada munachat al tzavro shel adam al yimna atzmo min harachamim. Even if there's a sharp sword that's placed on the neck of a person, meaning he's about to get slaughtered, he still should pray that Hashem should have mercy on him and he should get out of it somehow. Which is exactly what happened to Yehoshaphat. Yehoshaphat got out of the war. King Achav got killed, but Yehoshaphat still cried out to Hashem. Even though he made the mistake of going to war with Achav, he was still saved. So says Chizkiyahu, I have a tradition from my father's father, Yehoshaphat, that even if a guy's literally about to get killed, he shouldn't stop praying. The sword could be retracted. There's still a way out. Hashem has mercy. I could pray for Hashem's mercy. So says the Rambam, that's what it means, Al tityaesh min hapur'anut. Don't give up hope from pur'anut. Sometimes there are disasters, there are calamities. Don't give up hope. Don't stop praying. I'll share with you an interesting story that happened to myself. I learned in yeshiva, Torah Vadas, which is a tremendous place with lots of great Talmidei Chachamim. And my wife in her community, in her parents' community, was a woman that was unfortunately sick with a very bad disease. And what they were doing, because she was part of their community, between Mincha and Arvit, they were saying Tehillim out loud for this person. In public, Tehillim, that she should have her flushed. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worse, and she became even more ill. And the rabbi of that shul had said, okay, we're not doing Tehillim in public anymore. So the daughter of that woman was very upset. And she said, I don't understand, what's going on? We have to keep on praying. We have to, And the rabbi said, no, we're not doing that in public anymore, because basically what it meant was that she's almost at the end. Yeah. And she asked me what I think about it. I said, I don't really know. I'll do my research. So I was in Torah Vadas at the time, and I asked 3 great Talmidei Chachamim. The first one that I asked was Reb Leibel Willinger, the Rosh Kollel, and he's a Hasidic man, and he's a tremendous giant, Torah giant. And he said, what is he talking about? You have to pray even harder. no such thing. Keep on davening more Tehillim out loud. I don't agree with that, Rabbi, he said. You have to daven even harder. No such thing. That was his approach. So then I went to Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, Shlita, great Rabbi Reisman, may he live and be well. And Rabbi Reisman said to me, of course that rabbi's right. He's 100% right. I said, why? He said, because it's a tfilat shav, it's a wasted prayer. He said, she reached that point already. There's no point. I said to him, this Gemara, I said, but afilu cherev chadav unachad al tzavro shel adam al yimna atzmo min harachavim. I said to him, but it says in the Gemara over here that even if a person has a sword on his neck, you still have to pray. He said, yeah, but that's if the sword could be pulled away. Here the sword already, Hashem Yishmor, already went into most of her body. He said, there's no point. It's a wasted prayer. That was his take on it. May he live and be well. He's a great tzaddik, Rabbi Reisman. And then I asked the third rabbi, I asked the whole Bedin. I asked my Rebbe, Rav Belsky, Zatzal, Rav Belsky, he said no. It's true you don't say Tehillim out loud anymore. You don't do that anymore at this point, but you still pray. It's not a wasted prayer. It's not a tfilat shav. It's not something that's considered wasted. The person's not dead yet. You still could pray. You still have the right to pray. Maybe we're not going to do Tehillim out loud anymore, but we still will pray. So that's the interesting analysis of different Chachmei Yisrael, how to approach a situation like that. But the understanding is that there's always hope. There is always some kind of hope that you can hold on to, and you can always pray. There are some times where you see that, maybe it's not as great as we would think anymore, but like Rav Belsky said, you still pray. Maybe we're not going to do Tehillim out loud for everybody anymore, but you still pray, you still make the effort. And that's, I think that's, since he was my Rebbe, that's what I go with Rav Belsky's sheet on that one. Okay, everybody, we'll stop over here. Thank you very much for joining us. Unless you have any questions, we can call it a day. Thank you for hosting us, Mrs. Ariel, Tizkul and Mitzvot. And sure.
What's the difference between saying Tehillim out loud and